Senator from Mississippi.
Let me say from the outset that this Senate and this nation are profoundly fortunate to have had the services of Senator Orrin Hatch for decades and decades. And the speech that he just delivered to this body was profound in so many ways and true in so many ways. And it was made at 10 minutes till 6 on a Friday night when perhaps Americans are looking elsewhere. But just so much of what the senator said is absolutely the truth, and our country needs to hear it. And I appreciate him coming and delivering it in such a talented way.
Well, if the senator would yield, I want to thank my friend and colleague. I really appreciate it, and I enjoy serving with him, as I do with everybody in this body.
Well, Senator Wicker just talked there a minute about this. What do you think? Wouldn't it be great to have a chairman of the Finance Committee named Senator Orrin Hatch?
Well, it would be, and I think with the leadership of people like Senator Hatch, we would not be ignoring what we have out there facing us in America today, and that is nothing less than a financial crisis. And the senator from Utah is correct. The President of the United States is doing everything he can to change the subject from that real central issue of our faltering economy. And yes, the mainstream media is out there playing Trivial Pursuit and talking about everything that is not important and that is a distraction. But you just cannot get around the facts. And the facts are these. We have a $16 trillion staggering debt in this country. And this government has added $6 trillion in 3.5 short years. Just a fact, and you can't get around it. You also cannot get around these absolute truths. We've had no appropriation bills come out of this Senate this year. Now, our Republican friends in the House, it's a different story. They've done their work and they've passed product after product like they're supposed to do. And my hat is off to the chair, the gentleman from Kentucky, Chairman Rogers, for getting the appropriation bills done. We haven't done that in this Democrat-led Senate. We haven't passed a defense bill, first time in half a century that we will have gone through a whole session and not passed a defense bill at a time when we have troops at war, troops in harm's way. Our men and women putting themselves at risk and fighting and dying. We don't have a defense bill.
Well, Senator
Yes, sir.
Wicker, isn't it amazing we don't have a defense bill? You serve on the Armed Services Committee, as I do, and it came out of committee unanimously, bipartisan vote. And for some reason, the Democratic leadership has failed to bring up the bill to the floor for the first time in 50 years. Isn't that amazing?
No question about it. And it does not, it doesn't make me comfortable to point fingers, but there's no getting around the fact that there's one person on this planet that can call a bill up before this Senate, and that's the majority leader of the Senate. Hasn't brought the defense bill. We also don't have a budget resolution. Now again, our friends in the House, the Republican-led House under Speaker Boehner, have, during the 2 years of their stewardship, brought budget resolutions to the floor, passed them, sent them over here, only to be ignored. Now the President has submitted budgets. Didn't get a single vote in the House of Representatives, didn't get a single vote when we called it up as sort of a test vote here in the Senate. But this Senate, under the leadership of the Democratic majority, has not followed the statute. It says you bring a budget resolution up every year. Haven't done it. We're into our 4th year now. But the senator and I were talking, and I'll toss it to him on this. Beyond that, they don't have a budget deficit reduction plan. It's one thing to have a resolution, It could say anything. But what the American people need, what our future generations are crying out for, is a plan to reduce this debt. And I look forward and hope to see the day when my friend from Alabama is chairman of the Senate Budget Committee. And I would just ask him to assure everyone within the sound of our voices today that under his leadership as chairman of the Budget Committee, we will see a budget resolution brought to the floor and debated according to statute.
Senator Wicker, you ask a very good question, and every American needs to be thinking about that. And I have given a lot of thought to it. We haven't had a budget in 3 years, 1,241 days. We've not had a budget brought to the, passed on this floor of the Senate. Didn't even bring one up this year. If we are blessed by the American people, we, the Republican senators, to have a majority in this body, and why I'm honored to have the opportunity to lead the Budget Committee, we will have a budget. Failure is not an option. It cannot be that we will not comply with the law. But more than that, Senator Wicker, the question is, we have got to have a plan to get us off the course to financial disaster. And the budget is the way you lay that plan out. And don't you agree that the difficulty our Democrat colleagues had is, I suppose, anything they thought they could agree on and bring forth would not be popular with the American people. And they didn't want to subject themselves to having to debate it on the floor and having to vote on amendments as the Budget Act allows, even though you can pass a budget with a simple majority, it cannot be filibustered. And I guess what I would ask you, Senator Wicker, when you don't bring a budget because you can't agree or are unwilling to step forward with a plan, what you're really doing is failing to provide the leadership we were elected to give to America. And you don't have a plan that you're willing to announce to try to get us on the right course. A budget, wouldn't you agree, is sort of a plan to deal with the crisis that we're facing, and we've not seen one in this body.
Well, it's one of our basic responsibilities. As I said, the discretionary part of it is the appropriation bills. Not one single appropriation bill has cleared this Senate during 2012. And yes, indeed, at a time when we're running the debt of $6 trillion, when we're seeing our friends and allies across the ocean are teetering on the brink, we're seeing all the warning signs, and we have time in this capital city, the shining city on a hill, to be an example to the world. I can only answer your question by saying the president's budget was so unpopular it didn't get a single vote. There's not one single, the most left-wing, left-leaning senator would not step forward and embrace that budget. And I can only assume that what they would have suggested would have been very much like that. But when you're in the majority, you have a responsibility to lead. We all have a responsibility to lead, Mr. President. But in particular, when you're the only vehicle for bringing bills to the floor, you have a responsibility to lead in a time of crisis. And that's what we've been lacking here in the United States Senate. Of course, we do have the Federal Reserve. Leader of the Federal Reserve announced the other day he's going to print $40 billion extra each month. Now, that's his solution. I would counsel against this. I think most members on this side would counsel against this, but at least as a plan. We've had no indication from the leaders of the Senate whether they like that plan or not. We do know this. We passed a stimulus bill over here. It cost almost $1 trillion. Unemployment has gone up under this bill that was supposed to jumpstart the economy. It was supposed to do two things: jumpstart the economy and keep the unemployment rate 8% or less. Of course, we know for 42 months now, the unemployment rate has been over 8%. And the last thing the stimulus bill did was jumpstart the economy. It's been going downhill ever since. It's hard to put a pretty face on this situation. And of course, the result, a staggering 23 million American citizens either don't have a job, are underemployed, or have stopped looking for work. In addition, of course, the president promised in 2008, you remember that promise, Senator Sessions, that he would cut the deficit in half by the end of his first term. Well, this is the end of his first term. The deficit has mushroomed, not been cut in half. And so we're in a financial crisis, and everybody on television seems to be trying to paint a rosy picture and avoid the subject. So I am glad to join with my friend, the budget ranking member, and to suggest that we will have a plan as House Republicans had a specific plan in black and white to address this unbelievable financial crisis that our country faces.
Well, that's a challenge that we have to face. It's not easy. It'll be a challenge and difficult, force us to make difficult choices. But I feel, Senator Wicker, how I feel very frustrated. You know, we were small towns in America where we grew up, and if you had a tough choice to make and somebody came up with an idea and stood up and defended it, you respected them even if you didn't agree with it. And if you didn't have a better plan and all you did was criticize their plan, people wouldn't think much of you, would they?
That's exactly.
That's the way real people live. So what we've got in this body, and when the budgets were brought up, they brought up the House budget, the Ryan budget. We brought up the President's budget. Senator Toomey and others had a budget. Every one of them were brought up. Our Democrat colleagues voted against every one of them. Not in one instance setting out before the people what they believed in, what they would advocate for, what they would fight for, what they believed would fix the American economy and put us on the right track. And they have invested a tremendous amount of effort in attacking Congressman Ryan and the House's budget. And let me just say this about that budget. Any budget's going to be subject to some complaint here or there, but it was historic. It would change the debt course of America. It would reduce our deficit by $3.5 trillion. It would create economic growth. It was designed not just to be a budget-cutting, frugal budget, but also to try to create growth and prosperity in this country and get this country moving again and get business hiring again. It's a historic, good budget that would change the debt course of America and put us on the right path. And all we've heard from our colleagues, without anything themselves, is criticism of him. And I believe that the House has, like you said, fulfilled their duty.
I'll tell you what else it would do, Senator and Mr. President. It would tell the truth to the American people about what we're facing. And I like what our young nominee for Vice President said. We've got time to fix this, but we need to fix it, and we don't have much time. And speaking of telling the truth, I'd like to pivot, if I could, to a question that has been raised on this floor in the last couple of days about this Senate's lack of compliance with the Budget Act. Now, there's not a more learned expert on the Federal Budget Act of 1974 than my friend from Alabama, and I would just ask him to clarify, if he would, the statements and misstatements and charges and countercharges that have been made about the fact that there has not been a budget resolution brought to this floor for consideration and amendment.
I thank Senator Wicker for raising this point because we need to discuss it. And the American people need to ask themselves, who's telling the truth about this? Who's accurate about this? Because a group of us spoke, 40 or more Republicans expressed frustration with the lack of action in this body, the likes of which we've never seen perhaps in our history, really, with regard to not passing an appropriations bill. Historic research has been done. We've not passed a single appropriation bill 2 times, 2010 and this year, both under this Democratic leadership. Only time in history no appropriation bill's ever been passed. But Senator Reid yesterday used this language. Kind of hurt my feelings because I said we didn't have a budget. I'm ranking member of the Budget Committee. A half a dozen, or maybe 10 or 15 Republicans talked about not having a budget. He said, it's a lie to say we don't have a budget, close quote. Now, I don't know if that violates the rules of the Senate about personal attack, but I don't try not to use that word, lie. I try not to say my colleagues are lying. And if I ever would say something like that, I'd want to be sure I had absolute proof to back it up. And that's a responsibility. We like Harry Reid. He can be so charming, and I consider him a friend. I really do. He's always treated me fairly on the floor. But I got to tell you, the majority leader shouldn't have said that. First of all, it's not accurate. For example, Senator Reid announced unequivocally he had no intention of passing a budget. This is what he said back in last year. There is no need to have a Democratic budget, in my opinion. Well, as a statutory requirement, unfortunately, it doesn't say you go to jail if you don't pass one. And then the people are crying out for a plan to get out of the financial condition we're in. He said there's no need to have one, in my opinion. Then he went on to say at another time, quote, it would be foolish for us to do a budget, close quote. Foolish for us to do a budget. Well, and they did not do one. There is no budget. And for him to say it's a lie, to say we don't have a budget, is inaccurate. I would just point out, as the senator knows, that the Budget Act, well, the United States Code defines what a budget is. It says some of the things that have to be a part of a budget and the process for which, how one is produced. It has to be in the committee by April 1st. It sets out the date, April 1st. Then you have to have floor vote by April 15th. And when it comes to the floor, the rule says you have unlimited amendments, 50 hours of debate, then the debate ends. You can't filibuster it. 50 hours, about 1 week, it can be done. 6, 7 days at most.
It's the one thing can't be filibustered on.
Absolutely. A simple majority, a party with a majority, 53 senators, ought to be able to pass a budget. We passed a budget with 50 senators, 51, 50, I think, one time. This is, and a budget allows you to control everything but Social Security. You can't touch Social Security, but you can deal with Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, pensions, as well as the discretionary accounts. And so that was all avoided. And Senator Wicker, you've been around here and in the House for a number of years, but it seems to me it would have been a healthy thing indeed had we brought to the floor a budget the Democrats had, even if I didn't agree with it, and then we had a national public debate about these difficult choices the nation faces. And we actually had senators having to vote on them. Do you believe that balancing the budget is worth cutting some spending here? How much taxes are you saying we ought to raise? How much are you really cutting spending? Let's read the fine print. Are you cutting it how much and actually debating and voting on these things? That's what the majority leader and his colleagues wanted to avoid.
Senator, it's what every city council, every state legislature cannot avoid. They don't have a printing press down in Montgomery, Alabama, or Jackson, Mississippi. And I know the senator has seen the local delegations, county officials coming in, talking about economic development. And they tell me, Senator, now we've had to cut back on this, we've had to cut back on that, we've had to do this to our budget. We used to be able to afford these things, and we can't afford them anymore. They've made sensible decisions. Councils and legislatures, Republican and Democrat, have faced the hard choices. And it can't be any fun for them. They have to face the voters and say, we paid for this last year. We don't have the money this year. And families have had to do that, Senator.
I couldn't agree more. Just in my hometown, Mobile, Alabama, they fell one vote short of raising the sales tax because of the financial challenges they were facing, and they had a big debate about it. But they didn't duck the vote. They had to vote, and they decided that they didn't need to raise the taxes. And it wasn't a question of the city council being able to avoid a vote. But we in the great United States Senate, we travel the whole state over and over and over again, and we asked for this tough job. You know, my wife got a good phrase about it, Roger. She says, when I complain, don't blame me, you asked for the job. You know, we asked for this job. Nobody said it was going to be easy, and this is not easy, because we have never, Roger, been in a more fundamental We've never faced a more fundamental financial crisis because of demographics and history and trends that are going on, and our population situation is such that it is going to be difficult to meet these challenges.
But you know, we can meet these challenges. I've got grown children, 32, 28, and 25. And they may be about to age into the next year, but they wonder if they'll even receive Medicare when it comes time to retire. You know, that retirement for them will come sooner than they think. It seems like forever, but they don't really believe, that generation doesn't really believe Medicare will be there for them. If we tackle this problem, Medicare can be there for the next generation. Should be there for the next generation.
Exactly.
It won't look exactly like it does for my father, who's 88 years old today and depends on Medicare, but Medicare could be there, but not the way it's going now. We've got to tackle these issues.
You are so right. I mean, we're not going to have to cancel these programs.
No, sir.
We can save these programs. It's just going to require us to confront reality and make some changes in how we do business. I'd just like to say one more thing about this budget before I forget. My Democrat colleagues claim the Budget Control Act was a budget, but it only dealt with discretionary spending, didn't deal with all the other spending. It only set limits on expenditures, and it didn't have any debate on the floor. It was a secret agreement. There was a budget limitation placed on spending as a result of the Republicans insisting that we had to reduce some spending before we would allow the president to raise the debt limit. And that went on to the wee hours of the morning, and they put together a messed up bill, and now we're paying the price for it. But it did cut some spending, and it limited how much spending we could do. But it didn't go through the budget process. It didn't cover all of the government programs, and it doesn't have anything like the indices of a budget. And when it was an attempt was made, and successfully, to bring up the president's budget for a vote. And the motion was believed to be legitimate because there's no budget, and we were going to have a vote on it. And our Democrat colleagues ran to the parliamentarian to try to argue that this cap on spending that was agreed to last August was a budget, and they picked the parliamentarian. The majority hires the parliamentarian, and courageously and properly, the parliamentarian said, no, it's not a budget. And there's no budget in the United States Senate, and President Obama's budget was brought up and got 0 votes. So I just wanted to share that.
Well, I appreciate the senator sharing this time with me. Mr. President, I guess in a moment, Senator Sessions will yield the floor, that we'll go dark, subject to the call of the chair, and vote at midnight to sort of slink out of town. No appropriation bills, no defense bill, no dealing with the sequestration, Meat Act's cuts to defense and other programs. And, but we will have gotten away under cover of darkness to face the voters. And in this country, they're the ultimate arbiters. But I just appreciate this opportunity to stand on the floor with a statesman like my friend from Alabama and to thank him for his leadership in the budget issues, and to thank him for coming here and telling the truth to our colleagues and to the American people today.
Well, Senator Wicker, Senator Olympia Snowe, who's not running again, who's frustrated with this body, pointed out yesterday on the floor that we voted in this body a few years ago up until November 1st or something. We act like we've got to be out by the middle of September. We're not going to do any work during October, and we'll come back maybe after the election in a lame duck circumstance and see how much junk can be shoved through here without real vote. And isn't it true that we've had plenty of time since September to bring up the defense authorization bill, to bring up a budget, to bring up some of the appropriations bills, at least some of them?
Day after day.
There's not been a problem.
Hour after hour in quorum calls. It's very frustrating.
And
frustrating to the people who sent us here to do a job.
Thank you. I would say one thing, Mr. President. In a recent interview in July on CNBC with Mr. Erskine Bowles, who was President Clinton's chief of staff, appointed by President Obama to head the Debt Commission, this is what he said about the state of our finances. You've heard it said that 40% of what we spend every day, 40% of that is borrowed. It's really $4 billion a day that we borrow. And you probably think that's not true. People probably think that can't be true, that 40 cents of every dollar that we spend, that we put out the door, has to be borrowed from countries around the world and from others who will loan us the money, and we pay interest on it. This is what Mr. Bowles said. If you take last year, 100% of our revenue that came into the country, every nickel, every single dollar that came into the country last year was spent on what we call mandatory spending and interest on the debt. Mandatory spending is principally the entitlement programs, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. What that means is every single dollar we spent last year on these two wars, national defense, homeland security, education, infrastructure, high-value added research, every single dollar was borrowed. And half of it was borrowed from foreign countries. That is crazy, crazy. It's a formula for failure in any organization, close quote. That's the man President Obama chose to head the Debt Commission, a businessman who understands the threat this nation faces. We can get off this path. Congressman Ryan laid out a plan that would get us off this path. We have to get off this path. And as we head out from this Senate to return to our states and visit with our constituents, and as we head into an election, I'd just like to ask, is there one senator on the other side of the aisle who can defend to the good people of this country the decision of this body to withhold a budget, withhold a financial plan from the country? Can you defend that? Can you defend not even attempting to do the fundamental requirement of Congress, which is to appropriate the money to run the government, not even bring up a single bill for the second time in the history of the Republic? And what about the Defense Authorization Bill? Came out of our Armed Services Committee unanimously, being refused to brought up. The leadership has refused to bring it up on the floor. Can you defend that? Really, can you defend failing to deal with the fiscal cliff, the deep defense cuts and huge tax increases that will occur January 1st? Wouldn't the economy be better if that uncertainty had been removed and we'd already been brought those bills up and voted on now? Instead of, you know how they're going to do it. The leadership will meet over here, and it'll be December 23rd. The majority leader said we may be here till December 23rd. And that's when they'll bring it all up. You know, that's when the health care bill was passed. That's when Christmas Eve is when the health care bill was passed. So that's kind of the plan. Bring it up at the end. Everybody will have to vote for it, or the government will shut down, and there'll be a disaster. That's the kind of thing we should be avoiding. I really believe that the complaints that have been made here today are not just political rhetoric, not just talk, but represent a legitimate, honest criticism of the leadership of the Senate. And I think the American people should weigh that as they go to the polls. I thank the chair and would yield the floor.